Hey Leggari Nation! Today we're showing you how we coated these beautiful custom-built countertops to make them look like real stone. We used our Leggari Stone Kit for this and it turned out amazing. Watch the whole process of how it was done and how it turned out once it was installed in the kitchen. You can do this directly over your countertops as well. Visit our website to get your kit today.
So we had a buddy of ours bring these in. He's remodeling his kitchen, wanted to build some new tops, and then we're gonna do a really cool stone kit process on this using our new universal pigments, which are just solid epoxy pigments. There's no metallics in them, but they give you really cool effects. And so what we did first is we bondoed all the seams, we sanded them, we made sure our edges were rounded. He actually routed the edge. This edge isn't routed because it butts up to another piece in his kitchen. This is rounded. We rounded the bottom edges and then obviously set it up here and got it level. Make sure you guys' tops are level when you're coating them off site. So these are perfectly level. They're basically ready to go. We cleaned them and then I took our lint roller. Nice Leggari Tip is use a lint roller to remove any debris, sawdust, fibers from your rags after cleaning. That's gonna get your surface perfectly clean. We already ran it over at once and this is the stuff that we got up. All kinds of wood chunks and debris, dust. So I'm gonna do it one more time and see how much stuff we can get up on the second time. So you can kind of see all the debris that we're getting off of this, but still that's going to wind up in our primer if we didn't clean it. All right, so cool Leggari tip for you guys is to, when you have jacked up edges like these, all notched out crazy, not sure who cut this out, but we're gonna have a talk with them. So what we're gonna do is, obviously our stone kit process, we have tape on our edges to create a barrier. That way the resin doesn't flow until we want it to. And obviously we don't need it flowing in here because it's not an undermount sink. So we're gonna tape this off. I'm gonna get it as close in these gaps as I can. And then I'm gonna take paintable latex caulking and we're gonna fill up these gaps that the tape isn't secured as good. And that should hold the resin there, because if we don't, resin is gonna find its way in these holes and just start running down in there, and then it'll drag our design as it's moving. So this is what we do to stop that from happening. So I'm gonna go around 2 times, really try to get as good a seal as I can, especially in these tight corners that are cut not so well. So the caulking comes into play because what happens is the resin will start to find these little cracks and crevices, slowly start to leak in there, and then break the seal of the tape, and then your tape will fall off, or you'll just have epoxy running under that tape. So we're gonna take this paintable latex caulking here. So we wanna just kind of push it on into that edge. And I'm just coming back and pushing the tape up to it and just sealing it in. And then what'll happen is the caulking will dry to the tape and the counter, and then obviously your sink's gonna overhang these cutouts, you know, 1/2 inch or so, maybe even a little more, and so all that'll be covered anyways. As long as you guys get that paintable caulking, not gonna have an issue with the resin. And then this will tack up. You can paint it in about 40 minutes. We'll put a fan on it. Once it kind of crusts over, we're good to go. And then if you guys are doing something, maybe you have to do this somewhere where the resin is going to be covering and it's going to be showing, like maybe your backsplash edge, you want to caulk that seam or something, you can caulk it and then do our primer over that, and our primer will bond to this any paintable caulking. Just never use silicone. Nothing's going to stick to silicone. Always make sure it's a paintable latex caulking, and you'll be good to go. All right, so now I'm going to just tape off the rest of these counters, 2 layers, halfway on the edges and halfway above. All right guys, so we got 2 rows, 2 layers of tape. Now we're gonna press that seal really tight. And since we have a flat edge and so much surface to tape on, we don't need to add that latex caulking on these seams. And the primer's really sticky, and that's fine. We can tape on the primer when it's sticky. That's what's cool about our process and our primers is since it's a fast cure, it's gonna dry and cure underneath this tape. So by the time we pull it, it's not gonna pull off any of the primer. You just wanna make sure your edges are really clean. If you have dust and debris, it can pull the primer off because there's dust and debris behind the primer. So just make sure you clean your edges really good and you won't pull any of that primer off with the tape. Last thing is just pinch our edges, seal it up. All right, now we're ready to mix. I'm gonna show you a cool little tip how to warm your product up before you do your pours. I have a cold jug here. This has been sitting in our warehouse. It gets pretty cold in here, so I like to warm up our resin. It's always good to warm it up to about 70 degrees. The best way to do it is to fill up a bucket with warm water, set your jugs in there for about a half an hour, and it's good to have a temp gun where you can kind of periodically check it. Try to get it at 70 degrees. So like this jug, if I temp it, so 57.5, so really cold. It's gonna be really thick. And then these have been sitting in here for about a half an hour. We'll pull one out, and that is reading 69.4. So we're just about right there. And obviously, you don't want the water going past the lids. 2 jugs will fit in a 5-gallon bucket. And again, if it's really cold, you can replace the warm water with more warm water. And vice versa. Same thing as if you have hot resin, maybe it's been sitting in a hot garage or something, you can cool that down to give you some more working time by putting it in cold water. So cool little tip for you. So we'll get these out of here. And these are what we're gonna use for this kit, this countertop. I always like to wipe them off. That way we're not dripping any water into the resin when we're pouring it out. We're gonna be using our universal pigments. We got a light gray, a dark gray here. So if you guys buy these universal pigments off the store, single items, you'll need to add 5% of the pigment to however much epoxy you make. So we're gonna make 1.5 gallons of resin. We're gonna split that in half. So we're gonna have 3 quarts and 3 quarts. And then we're gonna add the universal pigment to that. So I'll just do some math here just to kind of walk you guys through that. So 3 quarts is 96 ounces. And so we're gonna minus 5%. That's giving us 4.8 ounces. So we need 4.8 ounces. I poured out 5 ounces. So that's kind of how you can figure out how much pigment you need to add to the resin. What's cool about this resin is it gives you completely different looks, effects, and you add it to the epoxy after you've mixed. So it's just really simple. There's no metallic dust going in the air. We really like them. They're really cool. So I'm gonna mix up the 1.5 gallons into this container, and then I'm gonna use a secondary mixing container, and I'll go over that. That way we make sure the resin is thoroughly mixed. When you guys are doing counters, floors, stuff like that, you always wanna use this mixing process. If you're doing sample boards, stuff like that, Smaller projects, you can mix them in a container. Just always make sure you scrape the sides, scrape the bottoms really well. So now that we have the resin kind of warmed up, it's going to drain out a lot easier than if it was 50 degrees. So that's always nice. We want to let these drain out for a minute. All right, now we're going to add the hardener. Same thing with this. We want to let it drain out for a minute, tilt it back, let the resin get out of the handle. All right, now we're going to mix this for about a minute, minute and a half, and then we're going to transfer it into the secondary mixing container. All right, now we're going to scrape this out in another bucket. Scrape the sides good. All right, now we'll mix in here for another 30 seconds to a minute. And now we know this resin's all going to get hard. There's not going to be any soft spots. Because what happens is we pour the part A in first. The whole bottom half gets covered in part A, the edges, the bottom. Then we add the part B, and unless we scrape these sides good, scrape the bottom good, there's going to be part A that's left on the sides that's not mixed in all the way. And if you get all of it out on your project, you're probably going to have soft spots. So now this has part A and B mixed in everywhere. We don't have any part A or part B on the sides by themselves. And now I'm going to mix it for 30 seconds to a minute, and everything's going to get hard. We don't have to worry about soft spots. All right, guys, resin's ready to go. So we need 3 quarts. And what we can do instead of wasting the containers, I can just pour out 3 quarts, and then I can mix the other color in the bucket. All right, so now we got 2 batches of 3 quarts. And same thing goes for this pigment. I actually warmed this pigment up by setting in water, hot water as well, because it's pretty thick. It's the fastest way to warm up your cold product or cool it down is using the water. And then since we have a light gray and a dark gray, I'm going to mix the light gray first so I don't have to clean my paddle. Get the majority off and then mix the darker color. All right, now we got our 2 colors ready to do the dirty pour batches. And then I'm going to show you guys a cool Leggari tip how to keep your paddles clean. That way you're not wasting them. Because what happens is your resin gets set up on there. It'll eventually start to flake off, chip off, get in your epoxy finishes, or maybe you use it to mix primer. Same thing with that. You can use this to clean it. We have denatured alcohol in a container. Simply put it in there, put it on your low speed, and just go forward and reverse a couple times. And then spin it fast. And we have a perfectly clean paddle. It's not going to cause us issues with doing different batches and getting chunks of dried epoxy in our projects. And then we label the containers, put denatured on it, pop the lid on, and we can use this multiple times. All right, so I'm going to make a mess, so I'm just going to put cardboard down. That way we can reuse this plastic. I'm going to make 10 batches. And then I like to always leave a little bit of each color in the container in case I want to go and do some fracture veins of a solid color or something. All right, so we'll get these over to the counter section and start dumping them out. I would have liked to maybe let this latex caulking sit a little longer, but we already mixed the resin, so we got to use it. But I'll kind of show you what it does. So if I kind of pull away, it's kind of like really elasticy, right? If that wasn't there, I would just pull the tape away and it would break the barrier. So this really works great for these jacked up edges. Here was a big hole there in that corner, so that's going to hold a lot better than not doing that. And then I can also map a design out. You can use the paint stick on black, works well. This is gray, so it's kind of hard to see my line from the paint stick, so we're just going to use a pencil. Just a random shape. That gives me one in the middle all the way down, just some long veins. And then obviously we'll do the same on these. This is going in a different spot in the kitchen, so it doesn't really have to line up to this, but easy way to map out your designs so you can see what it's kind of the pattern's gonna look like. All right, guys, we got all my batches here. So again, I'm just gonna kind of follow that first one that I did, and I like to do kind of skinnier pattern starting out. So notice I'm kind of jumping all around. I don't want to just pour a bunch out in one section because we want to kind of pour it out evenly across the whole countertop. So I'm always kind of watching what colors are coming out. Like if I'm getting down to like the light gray, I want to make sure I'm getting those light gray colors all throughout the top. We got quite a bit over here. All right, guys, so what we can do, instead of trying to fill in a lot of these guys, is just get rid of that surface tension with our finger. That way I can kind of just pour the resin out wherever I want. All right, guys, we got some blowouts in this front. Had a lot of blowouts here on this front edge. A lot of times it's because it's so cold in our warehouse. Tape doesn't want to stick when it's cold. The wood's cold. We prime it, then the primer gets cold. So this is kind of the process to repair those, because if we let that just kind of drip off, all of our design would kind of flow off. And that's really the only time we have blowouts, is when it's really cold in the warehouse. You guys have saw us do a lot of these kits and this process without blowouts at all, just by taping. So that's usually what the culprit is. Obviously, everywhere we did the caulking, We don't have any leaks here, and these edges were pretty jacked up. So just a little tip, if you guys are doing this stuff in the cold, tape it off and then run a bead of that caulking on there to kind of seal it up. Now obviously if it's on your front edge that you're going to be pulling the tape and coating, you're not going to want to do it there, but you can do it on your back edges, obviously around the sink, your sides, stuff like that, to minimize that. And then having clamps like we have here handy, it's probably a good idea. So we're basically done. We got all the resin on there, it's leveled off. So now I'm going to just take isopropyl alcohol and just spritz the surface, small to medium drops, and you'll see all the craters and cells this will create because of these pigments are a lot different than actual metallics. All right, so we'll let that evaporate for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll just mist it with denatured alcohol. That's gonna help the surface lay out glass smooth. It's gonna help release any air that's left in the resin. That way we don't have to torch. We never torch our products. We simply spray them with denatured, mist them with denatured alcohol, and that makes the surface of the epoxy lay out glass smooth. All right, guys, so now I'm just gonna spray it, mist it, full spray over the whole surface with the denatured alcohol. And then you can hit that again in another 10 minutes if you need to, but you can kind of see that it's laying out glass smooth already. So cool, we'll let this set. It's probably gonna let this sit for about 45 minutes, and then we'll check the tape because we don't want to pull it too early and screw the design up. We want to keep the design just like it is on the top. All right, guys, so we got quite the contraption going on here to keep the resin from flowing over, and I was thinking about some of the reasons why it maybe blew out so bad. One of them was he rounded the corners with a big rounded edge, and so what happens is we put the tape on there, you have this big rounded edge, all that product's gonna build up right here and gonna wanna push that tape out. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is obviously it's cold in here. Tape doesn't stick very well when it's cold out. And the last one is the trim piece that he put on there was some really rough wood, so the tape didn't stick to that as well. Whenever we do build counters and do trim edges, we do like base trim, the same stuff that you use on your house. We do base trim that's already primed. It's very smooth, and that's usually what we do on all our counters, and never really have a blowout using that. We have a nice flat surface to stick the tape to, and so those are kind of some tips for when you guys are doing this. But it is good to have stuff handy in case you do get blowouts, and obviously, you know, rough wood, tape doesn't stick to it, but the latex caulking we did around here worked great. Didn't bleed hardly anywhere. A lot of this is just from me pouring over and stuff. There's not big old puddles down here, so if we wouldn't have did the latex caulking on here, a lot of that would have drained right through all these edges and these cutouts, right, where we couldn't get a tight seal there. So just want to show you guys some of the issues we deal with on our projects, and hopefully you guys can learn from that. So this is ready to pull. How I know it's ready to pull is I can tilt back the tape and it just barely will start to flow, and then you can kind of see it's just barely moving, right? That's about the right time. Now if it's moving really fast, we don't want to pull it, because what's going to happen is it's going to drag the design off the edge. So this is about the perfect time, so we're going to pop off these clamps. So we just pull that tape, wad it up as we're pulling it off. And then once we pull it, we're just going to brush in this front edge. Make sure we get it all covered with epoxy. Don't worry about messing up your design, because that's going to still flow over and bring that top design down the front edge. All right guys, so we got all the tape off. Now I want to go through, and anywhere there's missed spots, I just want to brush that in with some epoxy. I don't need to hit the whole edge. I don't even need to hit here because it's already coated. Just any missed spots where I can see primer I want to coat with the resin. So you can see guys where I rubbed it in, now the design's coming down. It's almost down to the bottom. Tape's been pulled on there. We did all the edges. Everything's slicked off with a coat of epoxy. So now we can kind of let it run and drip. Last thing we have to do is just scrape these drips. We want to scrape the drips so we don't have to sand these down. It's not a big deal if you have to sand them, but it is more work. So it's nice to scrape those, and you'll have to maybe scrape them a few times over the next hour or two after you pull that tape, because the resin's still going to slowly drip over. And like I said, you can wait to pull this inside edge. There will be a lip anywhere you leave tape, so you'll have to sand that down a little or just razor blade cut that before you set your sink in. I'm going to try to pull it right now, see what it looks like. If it's kind of not pulling good, we'll just let it be. That way I don't have to deal with sanding this edge off, and it's pulling fine, so we'll just pull the whole thing off. That caulking that tape works really, really good. As you can see, no bleed marks in any of these corners. I mean, obviously that just started dripping because I pulled it, but there's no other way to get a tight seal with tape on jagged corners like this. So before I go, last thing I want to say is always check your edges periodically over the next hour or so. Make sure you don't have any runs or drips or any spots that you can address before the resin sets up. So if you notice a spot on your edge where maybe it looks like there's a drip there, or maybe you need to add a little color to it, it just looks kind of weird, you can fix those with a paintbrush with your hand. So don't just walk away and let it be. Always try to periodically check those edges, because those will ruin a job if you come back and you have some drips or imperfections in that front edge. So little tip, don't assume your edges are gonna look as they do right when you pull the tape. All right guys, so we're ready to top coat. We're within that 24-hour window, so we do not need to sand this. Now, if you guys have imperfections or anything that you want to sand down, you can spot sand those. Make sure you use 220 grit or finer. That way it doesn't scuff up the surface too much. So I'm gonna just roll this stuff out. Pretty simple process. And then we're doing our matte urethane on here, so this will be a matte finish. This thing turned out absolutely beautiful, the veining. And they're just such easy kits to create this look with that process. So we're using a 3/8 nap roller. It's already been de-shedded, obviously. So run a strip down the middle, and then we're gonna cross roll this out. So we wanna move quick. I'm not worried about roller lines in it right now. I just wanna get this spread out nice and thin, get my edges done, and then I can come back and fine tune the top and get rid of all the roller lines. Notice how I'm doing kind of 3-4 foot sections at a time. You don't want to do too much at once, because this is a quick dry formula. You have plenty of time to work with it, but once it's rolled out, it does tend to dry quickly. So that's why we do sections at a time. Hit all our edges. Make sure you're hitting your corners. Now we can go and back roll. So what's gonna happen when you guys hit your corners, indents that roller. So I wanna flatten this roller out before I start my back roll. Now we got a nice flat roller. Overlapping just a little. And I always have the handle angle to the left of me, whichever way I'm working. This is gonna be a little lighter, less chance of leaving a roller line. That's it guys, so we'll just continue that process all the way down. All right, guys, that's it. So we'll let this set up and dry, and we'll show you guys the final footage.